Oh, hi, I'm Owlbear Rogue. Welcome to the cave. Let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons Wild Beyond the Wishlight. How to run the carnival. This is information for DMs. We're not talking about running around the carnival causing chaos. We're talking about actually running it. So if you're a player, run along now, you hear? I'll see you in a different video. Okay, you watched my video on preparing for the game. You helped your players make their characters. You figured out how to hook them into the carnival and have them meet up as a group. Most importantly, you rented the snow cone machine and the air fryer for the authentic carnival food experience. And now it's time to actually run the first chapter of the adventure, which takes place, unsurprisingly, at the Witchlight Carnival. The carnival is enormous in more ways than one, my friends. And because it's so big, I actually don't recommend this adventure for all of its bright points. I don't recommend it for new DMs. If you have never run anything before, please, I beg you, go run some one-shots. Do not jump right into this carnival. I talk a lot about how easy Wild Beyond the Wishlight is for DMs to run. And when I say that, what I mean is you don't have to spend time fixing things or making them make sense. The book functions beautifully as written. But that doesn't mean it doesn't take work and skill to run parts of it. Because there's so much information to cover here, I'm going to make two videos. In this video, we'll cover the logistical things you need to be focused on, kind of the bones of the carnival, if you will. And in part two, we'll get into the meaty bits. What's the carnival's story? How does the plot unfold here? Who are the important NPCs? And how do you bring a sense of atmosphere to this magical setting? There are a lot of things to juggle in this first section of the adventure. A lot of plates to keep spinning. A lot of circus analogies to make, apparently. But thankfully, the book gives us two important tools to help us out: the map and the story tracker. Let's take a look at the map first. It's a gorgeous map. When you lay it out on the table, I promise your players are going to ooh and ah and be very excited to start exploring. I like to have it on the table but covered up when people come in, and then when they finally all get their tickets and get into the circus, pull that cover off, and it's always a big moment. One of the things you need to keep in mind as a DM when you're looking at this map is a number of the locations have special games or experiences your players can participate in. These don't necessarily drive the plot forward, but they're part of the fun of the carnival. If your players see that there's giant snail races, believe me, they're going to want to ride on the giant snail. And thankfully, the book gives you mechanics for how to run a giant snail race. But if you haven't looked at them before you sit down at the table, your player's excitement is going to die a little while you go, hold on, or just I need to read this. Wait a minute. Okay, you roll. No. You don't want to have everything, you don't have to have everything in the first chapter of the adventure memorized. It's way too big for that to be practical. But prioritize knowing where those special activities are that have their own mechanics and get to know them. I want to shout out one of those special activities. There is a pie eating contest your players can get into where there's a mechanic for taking custard damage. Not bludgeoning, not acid, custard damage. And that is something that has spilled over into my real life. Every Friday, I take extensive pizza damage. I talk about taking brownie damage. I take a dangerous amount of stuffing damage on Thanksgiving. Let me know your preferred food damage type in the comments. So as you look at your map, you're also going to want to make note of where important NPCs are located, what information players can get from each of those NPCs, and what important events happen each place that move the story forward. We'll flesh all that out a lot more in part two. In addition to helping you keep track of your players' characters and what kinds of activities and opportunities are triggered when they step into a new space, the map also helps you track the mood of the carnival. Around the outside of the map, there's a space for you to keep track, basically, of the vibes. How you move that tracker, the mood of the carnival, is going to be almost entirely determined by the attitude of your players and the choices they've made. If they're being good guests at the carnival, they're having a delightful time and being friendly with NPCs and helping people who need help and generally spreading cheer, the mood of the carnival is going to be bright. if they're being antisocial edgelords, if they're sneaking around and stealing things, being rude to NPCs, being too cool to participate in games, not giving any help when they come across someone in need, then things around the carnival are going to start to get a little unsettling. Suddenly, the sound of the calliope might turn ominous. Did something just move in the shadows? Come to think of it, these shadows feel a bit longer, a bit darker than they were before. You don't like the smile of that clown looking at you from around the side of the tent. Ooh. The passage of time is another important factor in this part of the adventure. Less so moving forward, but in this part of the adventure, it's really key. And there are 3 events the chapter outlines that happen at specific times. Essentially, the carnival is supposed to take place from around 8 in the evening to 4 in the morning. One magical night at the Witchlight. An hour into their adventure in the carnival, and by that I mean in-game time, not table time, the players encounter an event referred to as welcome gifts. There's an Ent and his squirrel friend, and they're passing out magical seeds and dandelions to guests as they walk around the carnival. In hour 4, everyone at the carnival crowds into the central tent for the Big Top extravaganza. This is a classic circus show with enthralling magical acts and a chance for our player characters to get into the ring and perform if they're up for it. This is also an important event because, depending on what your players have been up to, this might be the first glimpse they get of Mr. Witch and Mr. Light. Yes, this is the Witchlight Carnival, so the titular Mr. Witch and Mr. Light are very important NPCs. The final event at hour 8 is the crowning of the Witchlight Monarch. This also happens under the Big Top. This is probably the last thing your players will do before they make their way to the portal and on into Prismere and the next act of the story. It's also a good opportunity to reward a player who's been extra into doing good deeds and spreading joy all evening. Hopefully you have one of those. Hopefully you have a group that has produced someone who could possibly be crowned the Witchlight Monarch. Okay, so we've talked about the map, we've talked about the mood, and about timed events. But in the beginning of the video, I also mentioned something called the story tracker. What's that about? Well, one of the coolest parts of this campaign, in my opinion, is there are small micro events, little moments with NPCs that your characters can choose to engage in, scattered throughout the carnival, that have an impact on their experience all throughout the rest of the adventure. What does that mean? What am I talking about? Okay, one example. During the first time event that we talked about, welcome gifts, I mentioned there's a squirrel that hands out dandelions. Your players learn if you make a wish and blow on the dandelion, the wish might come true. This is something you need to make note of in your story tracker, and the book lets you know the significance of this event. It's, again, the story tracker, it's in the back of the book. I just made a copy of it for myself to mark up. You need to know if they made a wish, and you need to know what that wish was. As the DM, you could have them message it to you if they don't feel like telling the table. You need to know, and you need to remember it, because later, and by later, I mean like 2.5 chapters later. We're talking months of time passing in the real world. Those wishes will become significant to the story. And there's a number of little interactions like this with big consequences that don't become apparent for a long time. And when you've been playing this game for a year and your players get, say, caught in a cage they can't get out of and they're trapped deep in the lair of a hag, and you start describing the sound of a calliope mysteriously floating through the air, and you say, hey, do you remember that monkey that runs the calliope at the carnival? And you should be prepared for them to say, no, I don't remember that. That was a long time ago, Owlbear. Are you out of your mind? But you get to say, well, there was a calliope monkey, and he asked you for a button, and you gave it to him. A big congratulations on that choice, because now his spirit is going to return the favor by opening this cage door for you, just this one time. Their minds will be blown. Or say you helped a mermaid at the carnival and she gave you a singing lesson. Remember that? Well, guess what? You have advantage on this important performance check months later. What's that? You were crowned the Witchlight Monarch for spreading joy all around the carnival? Well, cool. These NPCs in Prismere see you as actual royalty and will treat you as such. There are moments like this everywhere, and if you don't keep track of them and refer to that sheet of paper as you go through the adventure, you're really shortchanging yourself, and more importantly, your players, out of one of the coolest, most surprising aspects of the game. So pay attention to your story tracker. Now, if we're talking about all of the logistical things you need to worry about as a DM in this first section, you might expect me to include making sure your player characters gel as a group. I have a hot take on this, though. I don't actually believe that it's your job as a DM. I think that's your player's job. Hopefully you've had a session 0. You should always be having session 0s. And in that session 0, I recommend telling your players, hey, I'm going to provide your character a plot hook. Get them to the carnival. Give them a reason to work together with the other PCs. That's a lot. So it is your job to figure out how to make that party into a team. They're all going to have character flaws and quirks, of course, but those shouldn't preclude them from being a part of the party. If they want to run off and do their own thing, they can go play Baldur's Gate. There's a face circus in that game, and it's awesome. They'll have a great time. But if they want to play with you at your table, they need to play a cooperative game, as the gods of the multiverse intended. DM's got 99 problems, and I refuse to make PC cohesiveness one of them. Okay, we've laid out the skeleton of the carnival here on a slab and thoroughly examined it. We've talked about the tools the book has given us, but what other tools do I use to help myself manage this enormous, whimsical monster? One literal physical tool I use in all of my games is a toy clock. That probably sounds odd, but I went out and I bought a bright yellow plastic Fisher-Price toy clock with little hands on it that you can move around. It's meant to help kids learn how to master the ancient, lost art of reading an analog clock, but I use it to keep track of time in my players' worlds, so that inevitably when one of them looks up from their dice and says, hey, what time is it? How long have we been trying to unlock this door? I can tell them. Or it's time maybe for me to say, oh, the sun is beginning to dip beneath the tree line, and the forest you've been traveling in starts to come alive with strange calls and rustles in the shadows. You wonder how you're going to make camp for the night. I know when to do that. I can also make note of where the clock is at the end of each game to remind myself of what time of day it is when we pick up the story next session. I also recommend making your own map for the carnival. Just a rough outline with major activities, plot points, information, and NPCs written into each spot. You'll be able to just glance down and know what is triggered by PCs walking into that area, what needs to happen, what they need to learn before they leave. It also doesn't hurt to include a page number for that area so that you can easily flip to it when you need it. The final tool I recommend you make for yourself is a list of absolute key points, bits of information the players have to have by the time they leave the carnival. There will almost certainly be areas your players don't make it to. If they don't get to see this PC or trigger this event, where can you put that instead? Could this NPC be in this area instead? Or could this other NPC have the information? You need a list of the essential info and events so you don't miss anything. And again, we'll talk about what those essentials are in part 2. I hope you haven't been too intimidated by the bones of the carnival. Like I said, it is a lot. Starting at the carnival and challenging as that is, again, I don't recommend this for first-time DMs. There's just too many moving parts to manage. But as you think about all those elements, you also have to keep the big picture in mind. For me, the big picture at the carnival is making sure the players get the info they need, making sure they make it into the portal to Prismere, and that they have a good time enjoying the carnival. I have to be honest, when I first picked up Wild Beyond the Wishlight, I was actually pretty disappointed that only the first chapter takes place in the carnival. A magical, interplanar, fae carnival is how they sold this campaign, and I honestly expected the entire adventure to take place there. It's a really special setting. And I give a lot of glowing praise to this module, but one of its warts is in this part of the adventure, your PCs don't get to spend much time at the carnival. It is 2 sessions worth of material at the most. And it's really easy for your PCs to quickly get swept up into the plot of the adventure, start chasing those threads, and forget to explore the carnival. Play games, eat special food, ride that giant snail. And I think it's a weakness of this chapter, so I try really, really hard to carve out space for the PCs to spend time just enjoying the special place that I've worked so hard to bring to life for them. And I hope you'll do the same. That's all I've got for part 1. In part 2, again, we're going to put some meat on these bones. We're going to talk about the carnival's origins, the important NPCs, the plot, the events you'll need to move the adventure forward, and get these PCs on their way to Prismeer. What do you think? Have you run it before? What were some of the challenges that you came across? What tools did you use that helped you out? I want to know how it went. As always, thank you for exploring the feminine urge to play D&D with me, Owlbear Rogue.